The echoes of my footsteps bounced off the cold stone walls as I cautiously stepped into the abandoned church. Moonlight filtered through the broken, stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows that danced across the pews and altar. I couldn't help but shiver, not just from the chill in the air, but from the ominous atmosphere that seemed to hang heavily in every corner. I had heard the rumors about this place, tales whispered in hushed tones about the church's dark history. They said that long ago, a charismatic preacher had led a congregation here, promising salvation and deliverance from the woes of the world. But as the story went, his sermons grew increasingly fervent, bordering on fanaticism. The once joyful congregation began to fear him, and whispers of his strange rituals began to circulate. As I wandered deeper into the church, the scent of dampness and decay filled my nostrils. Cobwebs clung to every crevice, as if the very building itself had been shunned by time. The pews looked as if they hadn't felt the weight of a worshiper in decades, and the air was heavy with an inexplicable dread. A sudden rustling sound made me jump, my heart racing. I turned toward the source of the noise, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A rat scurried away, disappearing into a crack in the wall. I chuckled nervously, chiding myself for letting my imagination run wild. After all, this was just a place, a building with a story attached to it. But the story, that was the thing. As I continued to explore, I came across a faded painting on the wall, a portrait of the preacher himself. His eyes seemed to follow me, a sinister grin curving his lips. The tale spoke of his intense gaze, how it could hold even the bravest soul captive. I quickly turned away, my skin crawling. I moved toward the altar, drawn by an eerie, pale light that flickered from the candles still standing there. The flickering cast grotesque shadows on the walls, and I felt a sudden wave of unease. It was as if the church itself was trying to communicate, to warn me away from its secrets. I reached out to touch the altar, my fingers grazing the cold, rough stone. And then, a whisper, so faint, so distant, that I wasn't sure I had heard it at all. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. There it was again, a disembodied murmur that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "Help me." The voice was barely audible, a desperate plea carried on the wind. My heart raced and I glanced around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Who was here? Was someone else exploring this forsaken place? "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate the air. I took a cautious step back, my eyes darting around, and that's when I saw it. A trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug, partially ajar. A draft of cold air emanated from its depths, ruffling the edges of the rug. My curiosity overcame my fear, and I crouched down to examine the trapdoor. With a hesitant breath, I reached out and pushed it open. A staircase descended into darkness, the steps worn from countless footsteps that had traversed them. The voice seemed to be coming from below, and though every instinct screamed at me to run, I couldn't ignore the desperate plea. I descended into the cold, damp underground, my flashlight guiding my way. The air grew colder, almost icy, and a musty smell pervaded the space. My heart hammered in my chest as I moved deeper, the voice growing louder, more distinct. "Help me." The words seemed to reverberate around me, bouncing off the walls in an eerie chorus. And then, I saw her, a figure huddled in the corner, her ragged clothes barely providing any warmth. Her hair hung in greasy strands, obscuring her face. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking as much as my hands. The figure slowly looked up, and I recoiled in horror. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of light, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as the realization hit me. She wasn't alive. This was a specter, a tortured soul trapped in this forsaken place. I turned to flee, but the exit had vanished. The staircase had vanished, replaced by a wall of stone. Panic seized me, and I pounded on the walls, my shouts echoing fruitlessly. The air grew colder, and the figure began to approach, her ghostly form floating off the ground. "Help me." The voice was no longer a whisper, but a chilling chant, a chorus of despair that seemed to come from all around me. I sank to the ground, my back against the cold stone, tears streaming down my face. There was no escape, no way out. I was trapped in this nightmare, just like the tortured soul before me. Time lost all meaning as I sat there, consumed by the darkness and the haunting voice that echoed in my mind. Days, weeks, months, it was impossible to tell. The church had become my prison, and the ghostly figure my tormentor. Her voice was a constant presence, a reminder of the horrors that had unfolded here. And then, one day, the voice changed. It was no longer a plea for help, but a wicked, triumphant laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I looked up to see the figure looming over me, her eyes gleaming with malevolence. "You're mine now," she hissed, her voice a distorted, guttural sound. I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls, but there was no one to hear me, no one to save me from the clutches of this malevolent spirit. The church had claimed me, body and soul, just as it had claimed all those before me. And so, I remain here, a prisoner of this accursed place, my own voice now joining the chorus of despair that haunts these walls. If you ever stumble upon this forsaken church, heed my warning. Turn away, for the horrors within cannot be escaped. The preacher's madness lives on, and his victims are doomed to suffer for all eternity.